Have you ever found yourself gazing at the night sky, feeling the profound weight of existence, and wondering, do my actions truly matter in the grand tapestry of the universe? What if I told you there was a specific, pivotal moment in time, an act so pure and profound that it resonated directly with the heart of the divine, not just a fleeting whisper, but a resounding echo of joy that brought an undeniable smile to the very face of God himself? This isn't merely a spiritual tale, it's a profound, almost unbelievable revelation of how deeply our seemingly small gestures can ripple through eternity, altering destinies and touching the very essence of the Creator. We often navigate our lives, facing challenges and celebrating triumphs, without ever truly grasping the cosmic significance of our choices. But what if we could pull back the veil, just for a moment, and witness the unseen reaction to our deeds? Imagine seeing the heavens themselves respond, feeling the palpable wave of divine pleasure, all because of one single act by one of God's chosen ones. This isn't hyperbole, it's a truth so profound it might just redefine your understanding of purpose and impact. You might think you know what matters, but the depths of this story will challenge every preconceived notion. Before we embark on this incredible journey to uncover the details of this pivotal act, I want to take a moment for something truly important. To every single one of you who has demonstrated incredible support and belief in our shared mission through Super Thanks, please know that my gratitude runs deeper than words can express. Your generosity is not just a donation, it's an affirmation, a lifeline that empowers us to continue bringing these transformative messages to light. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Your support is a divine blessing. Now, brace yourselves, because what you're about to uncover will not only astonish you, but will also forever change the way you perceive your own potential to influence the divine realm. This is more than just a story. It's an invitation to understand your inherent value and the extraordinary power of your spirit. If you are ready to peel back the layers of time and truly comprehend the magnitude of this one act that made God smile, a smile that reverberated across all creation, then type 777 the comments below. Let's delve into the profound significance and astonishing details of this moment. You have no idea how much it truly mattered. God's chosen ones. This one act made God smile. You have no idea how much it truly mattered. Some sounds are too sacred for this world to hear. But have you ever wondered what heaven hears when no one else is listening? When you're at your weakest, barely breathing beneath the weight of it all. And still you whisper, I trust you. Something eternal moves. It's not the kind of praise that fills a church or sparks a revival. It's the cry that never makes it past your lips, yet somehow splits the veil between earth and glory. Can silence worship louder than shouting? Can groans be hymns? And if the heavens tremble when no one claps, what does that say about the sound you made when no one else knew you were still standing? There's a depth in worship that doesn't come from songs, but from scars. In 2 Corinthians 12-9, Paul recounts God's reply, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. When you choose to remain, when everything in you wants to walk away, but you stay, that's not passive. That's war. That's sacrifice. That's a kind of offering only the broken can give. King David knew this when he said in Psalm 51-17, The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. Are you beginning to see it now? The trembling yes in the middle of your storm may have echoed louder in heaven than 1,000,000 perfect prayers. God's chosen ones don't always shine. Sometimes they just survive. Just like Hannah, the barren woman who poured out her soul in silent anguish at the temple. No one saw her as chosen. Eli thought she was drunk, but heaven recognized that weeping, and out of that hidden place came Samuel, one of the greatest prophets. How many times have you wept in places no one else noticed, not realizing your legacy was being born in that hidden grief? Artist Makoto Fujimura, a Japanese-American painter and cultural thinker, once said that beauty is birthed out of trauma. He works with broken pigments and pulverized minerals to create radiant images, something that mirrors how God often paints his glory with shattered moments, when your praise feels like fragments, when your heart feels cracked. Could it be that God is using those very pieces as his brush? Elena stood every Sunday at the back of a tiny church in eastern Spain. She never spoke, never sang aloud. Her husband had abandoned her. Her daughter hadn't spoken to her in 5 years. But every week, she came. One day, during communion, she whispered, "Still, you are good." No one heard her, but the air shifted. The atmosphere stilled. Months later, a young man who had been addicted to drugs came to faith after visiting that same service. He said, "Something broke in me when I stood next to her. I felt something real." He felt God. Could your silent worship be someone else's rescue? You are not unseen, not unheard. Andre once lost everything in a financial scandal. Friends, reputation, even his family. One night, sleeping in a borrowed car, he said, "God, I don't even know who I am anymore." But he didn't curse. He didn't run. He waited. A year later, he now leads a recovery network for others who've fallen, reminding them, your lowest place is still holy ground if you don't quit. What if your lowest point was the place God marked as sacred? Let your faith be like the resilience of a tree rooted beside a river, unseen roots going deep into the ground, holding on during the droughts. Let it be like the unbothered glow of a firefly in the pitch black. Its purpose not in being noticed, but in simply shining, or the loyalty of a swan, returning to the same nest year after year, whether watched or not. Could it be that consistency in the dark holds more glory than celebration in the light? The heavens are not impressed by platform, but by posture, by what you do when no one's watching. Just like the unnamed woman in Luke 7, who anointed Jesus' feet with her tears and perfume, her act wasn't on the program. It broke every social rule, but Jesus said her story would be told forever. Do you know how powerful that is? One moment, one act, that no one else valued, but it made God smile. What if your quiet yes today echoes in eternity the way hers did? God's chosen ones carry a signature sound, but it's not made with instruments or applause. It's made in the stillness, the surrender, the grit. It's not something you perform. It's something you become. And when the world overlooks your obedience, heaven marks it down like gold. You don't have to understand it. You just have to not walk away. Heaven has been tracking it, not the grand gestures, not the fireworks of your faith, but the fragile moments, those unseen acts of surrender when everything in you wanted to shut down, but your soul still whispered, "Thank you." Do you realize what that meant? Each tear-choked prayer you prayed in the dark wasn't lost. It was written down, not like a checklist of behavior, but like a sacred chronicle of loyalty, because worship isn't performance. It's proof that something eternal was being formed in you long before anything changed around you. Is it possible that your silence shook more than your songs ever did? that when your voice failed, your consistency screamed through the heavens. Many believe warfare requires noise declarations, fire, fury. But what if the deepest victories are silent? In the story of Job, we see a man who lost everything: children, wealth, health, and yet in Job 1:21, he bowed down and said, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." He didn't follow a victory formula. He wasn't trying to manipulate a result. He just refused to curse God. What does it say about you when your world breaks and you still bless? Something is moving now, not because you finally said the right thing, but because your heart never stopped bowing. There's a kind of faith that doesn't demand spotlight, but draws heaven's gaze. Ruth, the Moabite widow, followed Naomi into the unknown. She didn't know Boaz. She didn't have promises. She had grief, loss, poverty, and yet she said, "Where you go, I will go, and your God will be my God." No fireworks, no prophecy, just quiet alignment. And from that came the lineage of King David, and eventually Jesus. Have you ever considered that your unseen loyalty might be the soil of legacy? There's a depth of obedience that the world misses, but heaven never does. Cardinal Robert Sarah, a Guinean Catholic cardinal known for his spiritual austerity, once said, "Silence is not an absence. It is the presence of God." For years, he served in obscurity, fasting, praying, pouring out intercession. No one filmed it. No one celebrated it. But through him, thousands found clarity in chaos. What if your silence was not a void, but a vessel? Maria, a Colombian nurse, would walk to work each morning at 4 a.m. Her son was in prison. Her husband had died of an overdose. Yet every morning, before anyone stirred, she would light a candle, touch her rosary, and say, "Still, I walk in light." No camera caught it. No pastor affirmed it. But something holy lived in her steps. Years later, that son would speak about her at a youth retreat, saying, "I never knew what faith was until I watched her keep walking." Have your footsteps been preaching, even when your lips stayed shut? Your faith isn't waiting for a platform. It already has one, the battlefield of your daily obedience. It's like the persistence of wildflowers growing through cracked pavement, unnoticed, but unshaken, or the loyalty of penguins who stand in blizzards for weeks to protect their eggs, with no reward but life itself. And the tides, too, moving in submission to unseen forces, never praised, but always faithful. Could it be that your quiet submission is the loudest statement in a world obsessed with spectacle? Do you know what it takes to keep bowing when everything in your life is screaming for you to rise up in defiance or collapse in despair? The woman who anointed Jesus' feet with perfume from her past, her offering, wasn't praised by those in the room. In fact, they judged her. But Jesus said in Mark 14:9, "Wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told." Do you understand how wild that is? That a single, misunderstood act of love would be immortalized in Scripture. Why do we keep thinking God is impressed by volume when He clearly honors vulnerability? You, the one who stayed when no one saw, the one who whispered truth to your trembling soul when the world shouted lies. You didn't follow a formula. You didn't buy favor. You just kept bowing, and heaven heard every step. That's why something is shifting now, not because you figured it out, but because you refuse to bow to anything except Him. You need to hear this without a whisper of doubt. God is not just responding to you today. He has been watching, recording, and cherishing every hidden moment, not with a cold ledger of right and wrong, but with the eyes of a father who sees the weight behind the worship. Those nights you sat in the dark, unable to speak but unwilling to walk away, they are etched in eternity. How many times did you assume heaven was silent, when in truth, it was listening more closely than ever before? Could the nights that felt like nothing were actually the nights that crowned you in the Spirit? You saw those moments as wasted. But in Luke 21:2-3, Jesus noticed a widow dropping 2 small copper coins into the temple treasury. Everyone else gave out of abundance. She gave all she had. And he said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all the others." Do you see? Heaven doesn't count like earth does. What if the smallest offerings of your heart carried the weight of royal tribute before God? You thought your silence was empty, but silence can roar in the spiritual realm. Noah built an ark before the world had ever seen rain. That obedience looked foolish for years. No applause, no evidence, just hammering wood and following a divine whisper. Genesis 6:22 says, Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Have you considered that your quiet, yes, hammered out in invisible faith, is shaping the very vessel that will carry your legacy? In the world's eyes, what you did may have been small, but what if heaven saw it like a spark in the dark? Sister Wendy Beckett, a nun and renowned art historian, once said, "Silence is the very voice of God." She lived most of her life in solitude, praying and studying art. Yet millions were moved by her televised reflections, not because she shouted, but because her stillness had depth. Could it be that your unspoken worship is speaking in ways your words never could? And then there's Leo, a janitor in a hospital in Chicago. No one knew his name. He worked the night shift, humming hymns under his breath. Every time he cleaned the children's ward, he prayed over each bed, even if the child wasn't there. One nurse said, the atmosphere felt different when he was around. Years later, a doctor who had once battled depression as a medical student wrote a memoir and mentioned him. There was this janitor who used to pray. I never spoke to him, but I think his presence kept me from quitting. What if your faithfulness in the background has already prevented someone else's breakdown? The Spirit records things we don't even remember. That time you comforted a stranger, even though you were the one breaking. That moment you forgave when bitterness felt justified. That season when you tithed your last coin, not because you had to, but because you trusted. Have you ever wondered how many small moments in your life were actually seismic in heaven? You're like the roots of an ancient tree unseen, but holding up the forest, or like the stars still shining in the day, sky invisible to the human eye, but fully ablaze before the Creator, or like the heartbeat of a mother carrying a child steady, consistent, shaping life long before birth. What if your hidden life is the very proof of your chosenness? When Mary of Bethany poured perfume on Jesus' feet in John 12, some called it waste, but Jesus called it preparation. He said, "Leave her alone. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial." Could something you gave that felt unnoticed actually be sacred in the timeline of God? How many acts have you called meaningless, not knowing they were divine appointments? Your hands lifted in exhaustion, your tears falling without sound. Your refusal to give up when quitting would have been easier. Heaven wrote them all down, not as tasks completed, but as worship released. The world may call it small, but God doesn't measure size. He measures sacrifice. He measures sincerity. He measures surrender. And that chosen one is the sound your life has been singing all along. You see, most people think spiritual growth looks like a glow-up, like shining eyes, loud declarations, and undeniable power. But that's the highlight reel version, not the holy one. True growth, the kind that transforms you into someone heaven can trust, doesn't always come with clarity or applause. Sometimes it feels more like wandering than rising. It happens when the light doesn't come on, but you still step forward. When you don't know if your prayers are working, but you keep praying anyway. What if the real evidence of growth is not how bold you sound, but how surrendered you stay? Have you noticed how the strongest trees grow in the darkest forests? No spotlights, no spectators, just roots fighting through stone. Could your deepest growth be happening in the parts of your life no one else sees? There's a kind of sacred momentum that doesn't scream breakthrough, but hums faithfulness. When you quietly choose trust over control, when you bless God not because of what happened, but because of who He is. Isn't that the most dangerous kind of faith to darkness, the kind that doesn't need results to remain loyal? Hagar, the servant of Sarah, fled into the wilderness with her heart broken and her future unknown. She had no title, no plan, no voice, but God met her there. In Genesis 16:13, she said, "You are the God who sees me." She didn't even realize she was part of a divine story. She thought she was running away, but she was actually running into revelation. How many times have you felt lost, not realizing that hidden path was your appointment with the Almighty? This isn't about religion. It's not about checking boxes or knowing the perfect verse. It's about the kind of decision that doesn't make the headlines, the quiet yes that keeps echoing through your exhaustion. You kept showing up with your spirit open, even when your life was caving in. That is not weak. That's prophetic. That's not passive. That's praise. And yes, God saw every single time you whispered, "I still believe," even when belief felt foolish. Do you know how rare that is? Not the faith that celebrates miracles, that's beautiful, but common. What's rare is the praise that rises before the miracle even breathes. The kind of worship that builds an altar with no fire yet. Daniel worshipped openly in Babylon before the lions' mouths were shut. In Daniel 6:10, it says, "He went to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. No signs, no guarantees, just devotion in advance." Could it be that your consistency in obscurity is what makes you terrifying to hell? And it's not just ancient stories. Author and speaker Brené Brown, known for her groundbreaking work on vulnerability and courage, once said, "Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. But what about when no one sees you? That's when real courage is born." Brown wrote her most powerful material, not after a triumph, but in the wake of a personal, emotional breakdown. What if your spiritual growth isn't failing, it's fermenting? Thomas, who worked as a parking attendant in a downtown garage for 22 years, no ministry title, no fame, but every car he parked, he blessed. Every space he swept, he prayed over. One day, a woman came to thank him. She said her suicidal thoughts always left her when he smiled at her through the window. She didn't even know he was praying. That's the kind of worship that tears holes in darkness. You are not missing it. You are becoming it. Like the pearl forming inside an oyster, hidden in pain, covered in darkness, but being shaped into something priceless. Or like snow quietly building on mountaintops, no sound, no recognition. But one day it becomes the water that gives life to cities. or like the moon pulling tides in the night, invisible in force, undeniable in impact. Have you realized how powerful your unseen persistence truly is? David was anointed king, but went back to the field with sheep. Years passed before he ever wore a crown. But God wasn't testing his courage, he was shaping his character. In that silence, David learned the sound of heaven. In that obscurity, he learned how to war in worship. What if you're still in the field? Not because you've been forgotten, but because you've been trusted. And maybe that's why this message found you today. Not because you needed a new method, but because you needed a reminder. Your obedience in secret is already known in the Spirit. Heaven didn't miss the small things. Heaven never calls them small. You didn't wait to feel strong. You didn't wait for the music to swell or the breakthrough to arrive. You lifted your heart like a cracked, trembling vessel and placed it in the hands of the Eternal, not because you felt ready, but because you knew he was still worthy. That, right there, was sacred. That was worship. That was war. You didn't need spotlights or certainty. You offered what little you had left. And God smiled. Not because it looked perfect, but because it was honest. Do you know how rare that kind of surrender is? Some people think heaven responds to polished performances, flawless prayers, the right posture, the right playlist. But heaven isn't impressed by production. Heaven responds to posture. The posture of your soul when life goes off script. The posture of staying when fleeing would have felt easier. You've been posturing in faith, in a season that's tried to silence your worship, shake your rhythm, steal your joy. And yet, you're still here. And that is not survival. That is sacred resistance. Do you remember Elijah under the broom tree in 1 Kings 19? He was done, empty. He asked God to take his life, but instead of scolding him, God sent an angel, not with a command, but with bread and rest. And then, a whisper. Not a fire, not a storm, a whisper. What if heaven doesn't always meet desperation with power, but sometimes with presence? Could it be that God is closer than you think, even when you're too exhausted to sense him? Most people won't say this, but I will. Worship is not a vibe. It's not an aesthetic. It's not a song you sing when things go well. True worship is what leaks from your soul when everything collapses, and instead of cursing, you start speaking again, not with eloquence, but with groans and fragments, like, "I'm tired, but I still trust you." That sentence, it opens something ancient, something deep, not because it's perfectly crafted, but because it's real. Could it be that your broken honesty has unlocked more doors than your bold declarations ever did? Jesus watched a man with a withered hand in the synagogue, and he called him forward. The man didn't hide. He stood, exposed in his weakness. And Jesus said, "Stretch out your hand." Mark 3-5. That wasn't just about healing, it was about vulnerability. Have you ever felt like that? Being asked to show the one thing you'd rather hide, and doing it anyway. Just because you trust who's asking. Could your courage to remain visible in your weakness be your loudest form of worship? Malala Yousafzai, the youngest Nobel Peace Prize laureate, survived a brutal attack simply for trying to go to school. But after the violence, she didn't rage. She said, "I raise up my voice not so I can shout, but so that those without a voice can be heard." Her voice cracked, but she still spoke. Her faith wasn't noise, it was posture. What if your tired whispers are resounding in heaven like thunder? Then there's Elias, a retired army medic who spends every Sunday afternoon walking the trails near his home. No stage, no mic, just silence. Every time he passes a dying tree, he lays a hand on it and prays, "Lord, restore what's broken." It started as a habit. Now it's a holy rhythm. He doesn't know why, but he does it anyway. One day, a young woman saw him and later confessed, "I was planning to end my life that day, but something about how he prayed over that tree made me feel like maybe something could grow in me again." Have your invisible acts already saved someone else's future? Worship happens in the unseen, like lava building beneath the earth, silent, unseen, but shaping landscapes, like the metamorphosis inside a cocoon, messy, hidden, but transforming the creature within, or like the magnetic pull of gravity, unseen, constant, holding everything together. Isn't that what your worship has done lately? Held things together you didn't even realize were unraveling. Paul and Silas worshipped in prison, chains on their wrists, backs torn from beatings, and yet, Acts 16:25 tells us, about midnight Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. No vibe, no promise of escape, just praise in the dark. And what happened next wasn't subtle. The ground shook. The chains fell. Could your darkest worship be the key to someone else's deliverance? So don't minimize what you did. You didn't wait to feel strong. You didn't wait for the miracle. You simply showed up with your cracked voice, trembling hands, and fractured faith. And God, in his infinite tenderness, called that holy. Not because it was loud, but because it was love. When a seed breaks open, it doesn't look poetic. It looks violent. It looks like something has gone wrong. But beneath the surface, a miracle is unfolding, not in neatness, but in necessary disruption. That's what your worship has looked like this season. Not staged, not soft, not scripted. It's been raw, cracked open by pressure, leaking through exhaustion, and still real. And real is what heaven values most. Could it be that the very thing you thought disqualified you is what actually qualified you for glory? You didn't wait until life was beautiful. You didn't wait for applause. You gave God your heart in its bleeding condition, not because it was easy, but because something deeper in you refused to die. That chosen one is the posture of a warrior in Romans dues. Paul writes, "Present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." Not a perfect body, not a perfect voice, just a willing vessel, broken, maybe, but still burning. In the shadows, you kept choosing love when hate was easier, choosing prayer when silence felt safer, choosing presence when escape seemed sweeter. You didn't perform, you persevered. And now this is the moment where the atmosphere shifts. Not because you finally earned something, but because heaven is responding to what you've been planting all along. Have you noticed how resurrection often looks like failure before it looks like victory? In Judges 6, Gideon was hiding in a winepress, convinced he was weak. But the angel of the Lord greeted him not as a coward, but as a mighty warrior. God didn't see where he was hiding. He saw what he was becoming. Have you ever considered that what looked like your hiding place was actually your training ground? That the reason you felt invisible wasn't because God couldn't see you, but because he was watching you grow in secret. This isn't about reward. It's about recognition. Heaven isn't paying you back. It's pulling you forward. Because what you survived, while still believing, matters. It changed things. And now comes the echo. That undeniable ripple where God begins to unfold what was always his intention. Just like in the story of Esther, who remained hidden until the moment came to risk it all. And who knows? Mordecai said in Esther 4:14, "But that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. What if your pain didn't delay you? It prepared you." Poet and civil rights icon Maya Angelou once said, "We may encounter many defeats, but we must not be defeated." She wrote those words after surviving abuse, poverty, and silence. Her strength wasn't born from applause, it was carved out of trauma. She didn't wait to be healed to speak. She spoke, and the world began to heal with her. Could your breakthrough begin the moment you decide you're no longer waiting to be perfect to be seen? Jamila, a single mother of 3 in Detroit, worked 2 jobs and never had time for long prayers. But every night, she would kneel at the foot of her bed and say only one line, "God, thank you for holding me up today." For years, it felt unnoticed. But one night, her daughter came in crying, saying, "I don't know what faith is, but I want to know the God who keeps you strong like that." You never know when your hidden life is writing someone else's redemption. This is what God does. He brings honor from hiddenness, like the transformation of coal into diamond, hidden, pressed, unseen for years, or like ocean currents, powerful and invisible, shaping the world's climates from below, or like rain gathering in the sky, unseen until the exact moment it pours life into the soil. Has your private faith been storing power you didn't even know you were carrying? And now, the unveiling begins, not with fireworks, but with holy clarity. What was done in secret is now being acknowledged in spirit, not because you were flawless, but because you stayed faithful, not because you conquered with strength, but because you trusted through surrender. The voice of God doesn't say, "I was impressed." It says, "I saw you." And there's nothing more healing than to be fully seen and still fully loved. You see, there's a kind of breakthrough that doesn't come by effort. It doesn't respond to performance, formulas, or spiritual theatrics. It's quieter than that. It comes when heaven detects something ancient in your alignment, a sound that isn't loud, but recognizable, a rhythm that doesn't shake stadiums, but shakes eternity. Your spirit, even bruised and confused, released something familiar into the atmosphere, a scent of surrender, a posture that said, "This one didn't flinch." You worshipped when the answers were silent. You kept honoring when honor became a joke. You held the line when giving up would have looked more logical. And now the realm of the unseen is shifting. Because heaven doesn't just track what you say, it tracks what you align with. Could it be that your quiet consistency has created tremors in places your voice never reached? In the story of Job, heaven watched a man lose everything: family, health, wealth, dignity, and still choose God. Job 1:22 says, "In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing, not because he understood, but because he remained." Have you ever wondered if your loyalty in pain is what qualifies you for a breakthrough no enemy can touch? You're not crazy for feeling like something is closing in, because something is, but it's not your destruction. It's theirs. The delay is being dismantled. The strongholds that laughed at your prayers are now hearing footsteps. Chains that mocked your faith are shaking, because your worship, misunderstood on earth, was magnetic in the spirit. It didn't just rise, it realigned. There's a moment in Acts 10 when Cornelius, a Roman centurion, not even Jewish, offered prayers and gifts in private. No recognition, no revelation. Yet suddenly, an angel appears and says, "Your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Acts 10:4. What if your hidden offerings have been stacking in the spiritual realm, building altars you can't see yet? Alignment is louder than words. That's why Gideon, though hiding, was still chosen. That's why Hannah, though barren, kept coming to the temple. That's why Joseph, though imprisoned, still interpreted dreams. Not one of them looked powerful, but their spirits were aligned. What if the heavens don't move based on charisma, but on congruence? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who resisted the Nazi regime, once wrote, "Being a Christian is less about cautiously avoiding sin than about courageously and actively doing God's will." He was executed before seeing freedom come, but he aligned with heaven in a time when hell ruled culture. His prayers didn't change history instantly, but they disrupted timelines. Could your spiritual obedience be speeding up things the enemy thought he had time to block? In a small town in Kenya, Miriam opened her home each evening to children who had nowhere to sleep. She had nothing but a 2-room house and 1 loaf of bread most nights. Yet she'd pray over every child by name, saying, "One day, you'll remember this night and know you were loved." Decades later, one of those children became a government leader who credited her prayer for his calling. What if your smallest alignments today are building legacies generations will stand on? Your worship has moved things like tectonic plates slowly shifting under the ocean, invisible, but setting up tsunamis of change, like wind currents in the upper atmosphere, untraceable to most, yet determining global climate. Like sap rising in a winter tree, no leaves to prove it yet. But life is already surging. Isn't that what your spirit has been doing this whole time? The story of the woman with the alabaster jar in Luke 7:38 shows us this. Her offering wasn't strategic. It was spontaneous, costly, ridiculed by the religious. But Jesus said, "Her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown." He didn't point to her technique. He pointed to her alignment. What if heaven is not measuring how well you performed, but how deeply you surrendered? So yes, something is closing in, but not to suffocate you, to surround what tried to stop you. Because your alignment has given heaven permission to move, not according to man's schedule, but according to kingdom momentum. And the echo that's about to follow won't be a ripple. It'll be a surge. Not because you shouted louder, but because you stood longer. And the thing about you, you aligned in silence. You didn't advertise your obedience. You didn't weaponize your pain. You didn't make your loyalty a performance. You simply stayed soft. You could have grown callous. You could have become cynical. Bitterness offered you shortcuts that looked like survival. But you chose to remain tender, not weak, but tender. And that tenderness, under pressure, has been doing more than you realize. Could it be that softness in a harsh world is its own form of spiritual warfare? You praised when logic said complain. You trusted when facts said retreat. You forgave when revenge would have tasted better. You remained when nothing was confirming your choice. And now, what's coming to you isn't just a cosmic reward. It's not luck. It's not karma. It's the righteous response to what you've already aligned with in secret. You're not being paid back, you're being revealed. What if the next season isn't something new, but the unveiling of everything that's already been growing underground? Paul and Silas weren't in the prison praising to negotiate with God. They weren't holding their breath, waiting for a deal. They praised because they had already decided that God was still worthy, even with chains on their wrists. Acts 16:25 tells us, about midnight Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. That posture didn't just shake a prison, It shattered a dimension. What if your praise, though quiet and cracked, is building pressure in the spirit that no gate in hell can hold back much longer? You ever wonder why it's been so silent? Why the shift has taken so long? Because heaven never rushes the kind of transformation that's meant to last. You've been becoming someone that breakthrough can't corrupt. That visibility can't inflate. That applause can't own. Are you beginning to feel it? That stirring beneath the surface that tells you something is cracking, not in you, but around you? In the book of 1 Samuel 30, David returns to find his city burned, his family taken, and his men ready to stone him. And yet verse 6 says, "But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God." No prophet, no choir, just a man in ruin who chose alignment over panic. How many times have you stood alone and fed your own spirit while everything in your world was trying to collapse? Could it be that your self-encouragement in secret was your loudest sermon yet? Renowned conductor Leonard Bernstein, famous for leading the New York Philharmonic, once said, "The most difficult instrument to play is second fiddle." He meant humility, holding harmony without being the headline. Yet the entire symphony depends on that role. Bernstein's genius wasn't just in what he led, but in how he listened. Could your refusal to force the spotlight be the very thing that proved you were ready for it? Clara, who's worked in a hospital laundry room for 7 years, she doesn't wear a badge. She doesn't sit in meetings. But every morning, she prays over the linens and whispers a blessing into each set of sheets. One nurse said, "When I lay those blankets over a dying patient, something shifts in the room." Clara doesn't preach, but her praise has soaked into the fabric of a place where most people only see loss. What if the environments you've blessed in silence are about to echo with resurrection? Like a volcano that hasn't erupted for 100 years, silent on the surface, but slowly building pressure below, like a glacier melting drip by drip, until suddenly an avalanche transforms the entire landscape, like a chrysalis that looks lifeless, yet inside a caterpillar is rewriting its very DNA. Have you ever considered that your season of invisibility has been your season of divine redesign? And the doors that are about to open, you won't need to force them, because like Paul and Silas, your freedom won't come from keys. It will come from frequency, not the volume of your shout, but the integrity of your sound. Not how many people hear you, but how heaven recognizes you. You've already been walking in freedom. The opening is simply confirmation. That's you now. You didn't worship to escape the fire. You worshipped to declare that even in flames, you still belong to the unburned. You didn't shout because you saw breakthrough. You shouted because you knew the breaker. That's a different kind of authority. That's not survival. That's dominion. And while most people imagine worship as something that flows from peace, you learn to make it flow from pain. Have you realized yet that what you thought was damage was actually your consecration? Most people don't know what it feels like to lift their voice while their world crumbles, to sing with a broken heart and swollen eyes, to whisper, "God, I trust you," while every outcome screams the opposite. But you do. And that knowing, that sacred muscle you built in private, has reshaped the atmosphere around you. Could it be that your tears have baptized your territory? You didn't just believe with your mind, you enforced it with your being. Your trembling voice became a decree. Your shaking hands lifted in surrender became a spiritual strike against darkness. You weren't performing, you were legislating. That's why hell didn't just attack your circumstances, it came for your alignment. Because the enemy knows something most people don't. Faith that survives fire multiplies authority, and yours has multiplied. In Daniel 2, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego weren't saved from the fire. they were saved in it. And when King Nebuchadnezzar looked into the flames, he said, "I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Daniel 3:25. The fire didn't burn them, it burned what bound them. Has your worship been setting you free in ways even you haven't noticed yet? And here's what most miss. The spiritual realm doesn't wait for your perfect declaration. It responds to posture. It doesn't move when your voice hits the perfect pitch. It moves when your heart bows low enough to shake eternity. Your "I still know who's in control" didn't echo in vain. It was answered with movement, not delay. Not future consideration. Movement. Salm 34, 18 declares, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." The broken aren't far from God. They're surrounded by Him. What if your heartbreak became heaven's address? British nurse and missionary Amy Carmichael, who rescued hundreds of girls from exploitation in India, once said, "You can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving." She served decades in obscurity, many years in chronic pain, yet never stopped writing prayers and poems that changed lives. Her fire didn't consume her, it revealed her depth. Could your invisible persistence be echoing louder than the noise of platforms? And not every act of faith is dramatic. There's Elijah, a high school janitor in rural Ohio. Every morning, before the halls filled with students, he'd walk classroom by classroom, whispering, "Peace, rest here." He did it for 20 years. No one knew, until a student who battled suicidal thoughts wrote in their graduation speech, "I never knew why, but I always felt safe in this building, like hope lived here." What if the faith you enforce daily is already shifting atmospheres you'll never even see, like tectonic pressure that builds until it births mountains, like the desert that blooms suddenly after years of drought because the seeds were always there, just waiting for rain, or like the northern lights invisible during chaos, but revealed in stillness? Has your alignment been preparing beauty in silence? The power you carry isn't because you avoided the fire, it's because you came through it marked, but not burned, scarred, but still singing. You didn't wait for certainty, you moved in faith. And now, heaven is answering in action, not with a maybe, not with a later, but with a resounding now. There are moments that wear the disguise of stillness, quiet mornings, uneventful weeks, seasons that feel muted. But in the kingdom, stillness is never empty. It is often pregnant with divine interruption. That's where you are, right now. Not posed, positioned. Something you sowed when no one saw, a seed watered in groans, hidden in tears, protected by obedience, has reached its moment of activation. Could this be the sacred shift you stopped looking for because you assumed it had passed you by? It's not about if anymore. That phase ended the moment you worshipped without visible reward. This is now territory. And when God begins to respond to worship like yours, the kind born in ashes and pressed through silence, He doesn't merely bring comfort, He sends correction to the atmosphere, to timelines, to territories, to cycles that tried to cage you. What if the delay wasn't punishment, but setup? What if stillness was never stagnation, but sacred suspense? In 2 Kings 4, the Shunammite woman made a room for Elisha, not for blessing, but from honor. Years passed. Nothing happened, until the prophet turned and declared, "About this time next year, you will hold a son." The miracle didn't come as payment, it came as response. Her quiet act had filled a room heaven couldn't ignore. What if your obedience has already built the room where your miracle is now headed? You've been shifting things without seeing them, restraining your tongue, tithing with trembling, staying faithful in friendships that offered no reciprocity, showing up in worship when your soul felt absent. Do you realize how heavy that sounds in the spirit? Not noisy heavy, not dramatic decisive. Could it be that heaven is responding to what you forgot you planted? God's response isn't always applause. Sometimes it's a holy disruption. He rearranges rooms. He moves people. He unearths motifs, not to punish, but to realign. He doesn't come to simply wrap his arms around you. He comes to rearrange everything around you until it agrees with what he put inside you. That's why you've felt the tension lately. Heaven is correcting the climate around your calling. In Exodus 5, the Israelites stood at the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army behind them. No escape, no options. But in verse 13, Moses declared, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." And then the sea split. Deliverance wasn't delayed. It was disguised as dead end. What if the walls around you are not walls but waters about to part? British sculptor Barbara Hepworth once said, "Sculpture is the art of the whole as much as the whole." Her hands carved absence into presence, shaping voids into vision. She was ridiculed for years, until the world saw that her emptiness was deliberate design. What if your season of being misunderstood was actually the masterpiece God was shaping in full view of those who missed the point? Marcus, a bus driver in Queens, rarely spoke to his passengers beyond a polite "good morning," but every week he fasted one day and prayed over every person who boarded his route. By seat and row, one evening, a teen approached him and said, "I don't know why, but every time I get on your bus, I feel safe." That night, Marcus wept in his garage, not because he was seen, but because something finally aligned. What if the lives you've been covering in prayer are just now waking up to the protection you've carried in silence, like a fault line under pressure for centuries, shifting just enough to trigger an earthquake that redefines topography, or like an eclipse, two celestial bodies aligning after decades, creating moments of awe that last seconds but reshape memory forever, or a cicada that spends 17 years underground, waiting for the precise moment to rise and sing. Has your stillness been storing glory? And now, something holy is echoing. Not so they clap for you, but so they see him, the one who carried you, the one who saw every seed, every silence, every moment you didn't walk away. And those who ignored your praise, they'll feel the tremor of the one who honored it. Let me be even clearer. This moment you're walking into isn't a cosmic reward. This isn't the universe finally giving you your turn. This is prophecy catching up to the place you've already arrived in spirit. This is heaven saying, "We can't hold the next chapter back anymore. The sound of your endurance has become too loud to ignore." You didn't worship to manipulate this moment into being. You worshipped because there were days you couldn't even breathe without it, because praise became oxygen when fear tried to suffocate your mind, because honoring God was the one act that still made you feel alive when everything else went numb. And now that praise is carrying weight in realms far beyond your sightline. You didn't calculate this. You didn't scheme your way here. You were just real. And heaven moves for that kind of real, not the performance, not the polished theology, not the highlight reel, but the soul-deep yes that never needed an audience. Could it be that what has felt like delay was really divine insulation, protecting the purity of your posture until the atmosphere could match the gravity of your calling? Doors aren't opening because you earned them. They're opening because your spirit embodied something that couldn't be taught, only proven. Worship with no performance. Faith without applause. Obedience without feedback. That's what trained your core to carry something few ever hold. Glory without contamination. Have you noticed how few people actually stay holy when they finally get what they prayed for? In 1 Samuel 16, David was anointed king while still smelling like sheep. He didn't get a throne. He got a weight. And yet, he didn't stop worshipping in the field. His songs echoed in solitude long before they shook palaces. His promotion wasn't a surprise, it was inevitable. Because when character is built in the wilderness, the kingdom has to respond. Are you starting to sense it, the shift that feels less like a rival and more like confirmation? Hebrews 10:23 declares, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess. For he who promised is faithful." It's not about your grip on the promise, it's about the promise's grip on you. What if this season isn't the end of your endurance, but the echo of it? Let's not forget Joseph, sold by his brothers, thrown in prison, forgotten by those he helped. Yet Genesis 39:21 tells us, "The Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy." Not at the palace, at the prison. Could your season of silence be the exact place God has wrapped you in mercy too thick for human eyes to detect? American theologian A.W. Tozer once wrote, "It is doubtful whether God can bless a man greatly until he has hurt him deeply." Tozer wasn't promoting pain, he was pointing to depth. Because shallow faith buckles under heavy glory. But your faith, it's been forged in pressure. Could that be why God is now making space? Not to elevate you for vanity, but to plant you for impact. Luis, a former street sweeper in Bogota. For 25 years, he cleaned alleyways no one wanted to see, but he also memorized Bible verses and whispered them as he swept. One day, a boy who used to listen from a doorway returned years later as a pastor. He said, "Your voice taught me how to love Scripture." Luis never got recognition, but the word he carried someone else into purpose. What if your unseen obedience has been birthing callings you'll never take credit for? Creation reflects this rhythm, like coral reefs growing millimeter by millimeter under waves for centuries, sustaining entire ecosystems without fanfare, or like a pearl forming in darkness. Layer after layer, from irritation turned into beauty, or a tree's roots spreading silently underground for decades before the first fruit appears. Isn't that what your faith has been doing, expanding in unseen places until the world can no longer ignore the weight of what's been formed? Hear this deep in your spirit. God isn't just proud of you, He is placing you, not for status, not to decorate your resume, not so they'll clap, but so someone else can breathe because you stood, so territories can heal because you carried it right, so atmospheres shift not because of how loud you are, but because of how aligned you've become. And this time, you're not entering a moment, you're becoming one. There's a table being set with your name on it, not with silverware and linen, but with assignments, authority, and alignment. And it's not because you demanded the seat, it's because your worship quietly built the seat. Your tears watered the ground. Your surrender shaped the wood. Your posture carved the invitation. You didn't claw for elevation. You bowed when no one asked you to. And that bowing, that hidden posture in obscurity, it sent out a frequency that heaven couldn't ignore. You never needed to promote yourself because you already provoked the throne. So when doors begin to knock from the other side, when conversations you thought were finished start circling back, when names that once overlooked you start seeking you out, don't flinch. It's not coincidence. It's kingdom. Could it be that what felt like rejection was simply heaven reserving your name for a table that couldn't be tainted by ambition? In Psalm 23:5, David proclaims, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." That wasn't poetic exaggeration, that was prophecy realized. A man who was once hunted, now hosted. And he didn't fight his way there. He followed. The shepherd brought him through the valley, through the shadows, through the silence intersecting. What if you're not being summoned because you're ready to shine, but because you're finally ready to carry what the table holds? The story of Mephibosheth in 2 Samuel 9 is often overlooked, but it's seismic. Crippled from childhood, living in a place called Lodebar, a barren land of forgotten people, until King David sends for him, not to punish, not to pity, but to restore. David says, "You will always eat at my table." Mephibosheth didn't petition for that seat. His identity did. Could the table God is setting for you be the result of a lineage of surrender that even your wounds couldn't cancel? You didn't craft a platform, you cultivated presence. And that presence speaks. It speaks louder than applause, louder than strategy, louder than followers. Heaven responds to presence because presence means God is welcomed, not just mentioned. And now the reveal has begun. This isn't you climbing up. This is glory pulling you forward. Can you feel it in your bones? The weight of recognition that doesn't inflate you, but roots you deeper. S. Lewis, famed Oxford scholar and author of the Chronicles of Narnia, once said, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less." He wrote those words after coming to faith later in life, realizing that worship wasn't about shrinking. It was about becoming truly visible before God. What if your humility hasn't hidden you? It's refined your reflection until heaven could finally say, "Now, this vessel is ready." Eliana, who worked as a nighttime janitor in a courthouse for over 15 years, she'd whisper prayers over every courtroom and wipe the judges' benches with reverence. Years later, a young woman who had been sentenced to a second chance by a judge who'd never been lenient tracked her down. She said, "I don't know what happened that day, but the courtroom felt different. It felt like mercy lived there." Eliana never got credit, but she carried climate. Could it be you've been shaping atmospheres while thinking you were just surviving? Nature confirms this mystery. Like a seed that germinates in soil long before it ever breaks ground, unseen, but undeniably alive. Or like tectonic plates shifting slowly beneath the crust until a mountain range rises in what looks like a moment but was actually centuries in the making. Or like the aurora borealis, the result of charged particles from the sun meeting Earth's magnetic field light, born from unseen collision. Has the pressure you've been under been preparing a spectacle that only heaven could time? So here's what matters now. Keep your posture. You don't need to campaign. You don't need to convince. You don't even need to clarify. Because when God confirms you, really confirms you, no critic, no gatekeeper, no overlooked resume can revoke what was stamped in heaven before it ever touched earth. Are you beginning to see it? The honor wasn't in the seat. It was in the shaping. The real miracle isn't just the open door. It's the person who still walked in humble, unshaken, unbent. This is not about being impressive. It's about becoming impactful. Because this time, the glory doesn't rest on the spotlight. It rests on the substance, and you, beloved, have been prepared to carry it. Let this be your reminder, not just a comforting thought, but a spiritual announcement echoing through realms seen and unseen. Every song you sang through heartbreak wasn't lost in the wind. It was recorded like a melody in the courts of heaven. Every prayer you mumbled while exhaustion blurred Your thoughts didn't disappear. It moved unseen weight, and every broken whisper of still, "I trust you," uttered with trembling lips, became a divine decree. You thought the silence you sat in was a void, empty, still, pointless. But silence in God's world isn't emptiness. It's incubation. It's where roots stretch beneath the soil, where promises settle deep enough to not be shaken later. What if the pain didn't delay your promise? It was preparing the womb that could actually carry it. This is the shift, the divine transition from hiddenness to revealing. You're not just stepping into a new chapter, you're stepping into the harvest of faithfulness nobody else saw. What's birthing now didn't come from ambition. It came from alignment, from agony, from sacred stillness. Could it be that your quiet surrender was louder in heaven than the loudest sermon on earth? In Luke 1, Elizabeth carried John the Baptist in old age, long after anyone thought it was possible. For 5 months she remained hidden, and when she finally spoke, she said, "The Lord has done this for me. In these days he has shown his favor and taken away my disgrace among the people." Luke 1:25. What if this is your moment to step out of spiritual hiding and into holy fulfillment? Every wound you carried became an opening for worship. Every scar, a testimony forming in silence. This is where your private faith becomes public fire. You didn't worship for attention. You worshipped because it was the only way your soul could breathe. And now heaven is releasing what's been held, not as a reward, but as recognition. Heaven's been listening all along. What if you've been in labor this entire time, but didn't realize it because the contractions looked like delay? Joseph had a dream at 17 and spent years misunderstood, enslaved, and imprisoned. But in Genesis 41, Pharaoh calls for him suddenly, and Joseph interprets a dream no one else could. In a moment, he's promoted, but not because he strategized, because he survived the hidden seasons with integrity intact. Are you ready to see what happens when survival becomes significance? Back in the early 20th century, Florence Price, the first African-American woman to be recognized as a symphonic composer, wrote music in obscurity. Most orchestras rejected her work, but she kept composing in the silence of her own home, believing it mattered. Her music wasn't discovered until decades after her death, buried in an old attic. Today, her symphonies are played globally. What if your most anointed expressions have yet to be seen, but were never wasted? Let me tell you about Kai, a high school lunch server in rural Canada. Every day, for years, she greeted students with the same phrase, "You matter," even when you don't feel it. Most ignored it. Honor Boy didn't. After graduating, he wrote her a letter. "There were days I was planning not to come back, but your voice gave me a reason." Kai never preached a sermon. She just stayed faithful. Could your daily posture be preserving someone else's destiny without you even knowing? Creation mirrors this rhythm, like a glacier massive, majestic, and moving so slowly it appears still, but in reality it reshapes landscapes over time. Or the bamboo tree watered for years before it breaks the ground, then suddenly shoots up 90 feet in 6 weeks. Or like a volcano, resting for decades, until pressure finally breaks through. Not to destroy, but to recreate. Is it possible that what's rising in you isn't sudden, just finally visible? You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to explain how long it took. You don't need to defend how quiet your process was. Because when heaven says, "Well done," that voice silences every other one. The applause of people is sweet, but the approval of God, that becomes foundation. And the best part, he's been listening all along. So hold this close. Your surrender never went unnoticed. It was shaping rooms you haven't entered yet. It was writing chapters you didn't even know your life would speak into. And now, the silence you feared is about to become the stage for your testimony. So take a breath, chosen one. Let this moment settle into your bones, because what you've just walked through isn't just another message. It's confirmation. It's heaven leaning close, whispering, "Yes, I saw that. That one act of surrender, the one you thought no one noticed it, reached the throne. It wasn't just sweet, it was sacred. And maybe you didn't think it was much. Maybe you mumbled it through exhaustion, or offered it through tears, or whispered it with a shaking voice and an aching heart. But it moved something, it shifted the atmosphere, it built something eternal, and now it's birthing something divine. You didn't do it for applause. You didn't do it to impress. You did it because deep down, even in the silence, even in the ache, even when your faith didn't feel strong, your spirit still knew who to trust. You see, God was never after your performance. He was always looking at your posture. The world might applaud confidence, charisma, and clarity, but heaven responds to consistency. Heaven responds to hearts that stay open even after they've been broken. Heaven responds to quiet hands raised in the dark, to voices that say, "I still trust you," when nothing makes sense. And you, yes, you did that. So don't be surprised when the atmosphere starts to shift around you. Don't be caught off guard when prayers you forgot you even prayed start unfolding. What's coming next isn't random. It's righteous. It's a response to everything you've been faithful with in secret. The silence wasn't a void. It was a womb. And now, what was once hidden is about to be revealed, not for your status, but for God's glory. So if this message stirred something in you, if it echoed in a part of your spirit that's been waiting to breathe again, then don't let it stop with you. Let it become a ripple. Let it pour into others. Like the video. Share it with someone who's walking through their own silence. Comment below how it spoke to you. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a word meant for your spirit. And if you feel led to go even deeper and support this space through super thanks, know this: it's not just generosity, it's legacy. It helps create a place where people can come back to hear truth, to find clarity, to remember they're not alone. But whether you give or not, whether you sow financially or simply showed up and stayed with me through every word, I want you to know I see you, and more importantly, God sees you, and that's enough. So now, as we close this moment, I speak blessing over you. May clarity flood your mind where confusion once lived. May peace return to the places that once pulsed with fear. May favor track you down not because of what you've earned, but because of what you've endured. May heaven make room for your voice in rooms where your name was never mentioned. And may the oil on your life increase, not to make you famous, but to make God known. You're not just a survivor of hard seasons. You're the echo of obedience. You're the sound of surrender. And your life, your actual, real, messy, sacred life is carrying something this world desperately needs. You are the one act that made God smile. You are the sound that shook the silence. And now you are stepping into the reason you were hidden, not to impress, but to impact. Until next time, stay aligned, stay anchored, stay aflame. The heavens smiled because of you. And now, the earth is about to respond